Welcome back to TaraChessAcademy. Today we're going to start off with this puzzle, Black to play, what is the winning plan? The best move is d2 because if you went queen e2, the knight would capture the queen. So when you move the pawn to d2, the pawn is attacking the bishop and also threatening to promote. And if the bishop captures the pawn, our bishop would come to a6 and make a checkmate. Then the bishop would block and we would capture. If the queen blocks, it's not a checkmate, but you win the queen, so it's a winning advantage. When we went our pawn to d2, it opens up the bishop to this diagonal. And if they ignored our move and played knight to e2, we would promote and make a checkmate. d2 is the best because if you went c2, the bishop could capture the pawn. And then if you tried to make a checkmate, the bishop would come to e3 and it's protected by the queen. So this would not be a checkmate for black. Now let's try this puzzle. Black to play and checkmate in 3 moves. The first move is with the queen because if you went the rook to f2, white could block with the knight, and now there's no good checks. If we went queen b5, if we went queen b4, they could block with the queen, and then there's nothing after. So let's try queen g5. The king only has one move, which is to e1, because our knight is controlling e2, our queen is controlling e3 and c1. So they have to go to e1. We can't move our rook to f1 because the bishop is there. So we give another check with our queen. The queen is getting closer. And now the white king doesn't have any squares. The only thing they can do is block. If they block with the knight, how can black make checkmate in one move? Black would move the rook to f1. The rook is protected by the knight, and f2 and d2 are both controlled by the queen. If they block with the bishop, we can still do f1 because the bishop is pinned. That's why it can't capture the rook. And if they blocked with the queen, we would do the same thing. The queen is pinned, so they can't capture the rook. White to play and calculate to find the skewer tactic. First, we would move our rook to h7. It's protected by the queen, so that's why the king can't capture. The king, if it goes to g8, we would make checkmate in 2 moves by first going to h8, and then bringing our queen to h7, which is a checkmate because our pawn is controlling f6. If the king goes to f8, we wouldn't do h8 right away because the bishop would block our skewer. So we would move our queen to h6, which forces the king to the left, because again, if the king goes to g8, we would make a checkmate by going to h8 or moving our queen to g7. So if the king goes to e8, now we can make a skewer by bringing our rook to h8. If the bishop blocks, we capture for free. If the queen blocks, we would still capture. So the best move for black is to move the king, and then we would capture the rook. White to play, respond to black's last move, which was queen c8. When the queen goes to c8, they're offering a queen trade, and they're also protecting the rook, because if we capture, the queen would capture our queen. And if we captured their queen, it would be a queen trade. It wouldn't be anything special. Also, the queen is hanging and the knight is hanging. The pawn is also about to capture it. The best move for white is to move the knight to f5. At first, you might think it's bad because then you're pinning yourself. Now the knight is not allowed to move, then we would lose our queen. But when we do this, we're attacking the bishop. We also take away the defense of the rook, because now when we do our knight to f5, the queen is no longer protecting the rook. So we're attacking the bishop, the rook, and most importantly, we're attacking the checkmate on g7. On the next move, we're planning to play queen takes g7, which is a queen and helper mate, because the knight is guarding the queen and the black king doesn't have any legal squares. So knight f5 is the best move. White to play, find the best plan. Here there's a couple of ideas. We notice that the queen, knight, and king are on the same diagonal, so that might be an important idea. There's also an idea of accepting the queen trade. That's something you might want to calculate, or capturing something that's hanging like the pawn on d6. If you accept the queen trade, it's nothing special and you wouldn't get any advantages out of it. Also, they have an extra rook, so another reason why you don't want to do this. If you capture the pawn, this pawn is not a big deal and you can't have as much as an advantage. So that's why the best move is to bring the knight to f7, because after the king goes to g8, then we can make a smothered checkmate by first giving a double check. The knight and the queen are attacking the king, so that's why the rook can't block the check, because when you're in a double check, the only thing to do is run away with the king. The king has to run away. Then we move our queen to g8. The rook has to capture because the queen is protected by the knight. That's why the king can't capture. The rook has to capture, and now the black king is trapped in the corner, so we would move our knight to f7. This is called a smothered checkmate, where first we do a double check, we sacrifice the queen, and then the knight checkmates the trapped king. After knight f7, If the rook captures, if they don't capture, it leads to checkmate. So the best thing is to sacrifice the rook. We would capture the queen for free. We wouldn't capture the rook. We'd capture the queen because it's more points. It's not a checkmate because they can block the check. And now our queen can't make a checkmate because the rook is protected by the bishop. So queen f8 is not a checkmate, but we do have an extra queen, so that gives us the advantage. Now let's do a tactic called zugzwang, where any move they make will worsen their position. Black plays the move b5. How should you respond to this move? Should you capture the pawn? Should you advance the pawn or do something with the king? First, let's look at the white king's options. The white king is not allowed to advance to the fifth rank because two kings can never touch. That's why we can't bring our king to c5, d5, or e5. We're not allowed to advance further. And if our king goes back to the third rank, it's bad to move the king back because now the black king can become more active. Then the black king could come closer and find a way to win our pawns because the white king will be pushed back. Something like this. If you capture the pawn, this also doesn't work because black would capture back. They don't want you to have the passed pawns, so they would capture back. And then you realize that all of your pawns are blocked. And if you move the pawn to d4, you would lose the pawn and give black a passed pawn, which would not be good. We don't want our pawns to be blocked. We want our pawns to move free. But then why would we try a5? a5, even though it blocks all of our pawns, this is an exception because black has to move the king. If they move their king to c6, our king would get closer to the pawns and go to e5. That's the only way to advance. And we would find a way to win the pawns, which would make it easier for us to promote. We win these pawns and then we promote our pawn. So the black king has to move, and that's why they choose to go to d7. And this move that we're about to make is very important because if you don't play the right move, the game you wouldn't have an advantage. So think, where should you advance the king? To c5, d5, or e5? d5 is the best because if you go to c5, black can do something called taking the opposition. They wouldn't go to e6 or e7 or go back to the 8th rank. They would go to c7. Opposition is like facing the kings. Both kings are on the same file, and this is opposition. There's one step away from both of the kings. This is direct opposition. That's why c5 doesn't work because they take the opposition, and because they have the opposition, we're not allowed to advance our king further. After we go to d5, they would do opposition again. There's one step away from the kings. And no matter how hard we try, we're not allowed to advance further because two kings can never touch. So that's why we have to be very careful about where we should advance our king. We should go to d5, and this way we're taking the opposition. When we do d5, we're starting the opposition or taking control over it. If we do c5, we're letting them have the opposition. So we should go to d5. And if black goes to the left, we would go to the right. And then we would have a way to win the pawns. If they go to c6, then we go to f6 and start to win the pawns. If the king goes to the right, then we would go to the left, and then we would win the pawns on the left side. So this was a tactic called zugzwang, where any move they make will worsen their position. The black king would like to stay on d7 and stop the white king from advancing, but this doesn't work because black has to make a move. They don't have any good pawn moves. All of their pawns are blocked, and if they do g5, we would capture. So they have to make a move with the king, but any move they make will worsen their position.
Recording in progress.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with others. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!